Part 70. A Middle School Cartoonist. Author, Mao Mao. Chapter 693. Chapter 693, Even a Man Would Be Angry and Angry. Looking at a middle-level cartoonist who kept yawning while drawing manga manuscripts, Yoshida, who was observing silently, couldn't help but frown. After scanning the table with a large number of manga manuscripts, he opened and closed his mouth several times. In the end, he didn't say anything. At this time, should I accuse a middle-grade cartoonist of not caring about his body in order to complete the cartoon manuscript? In the past, Yoshida would indeed have said this, and would have scolded a certain middle-class cartoonist like this. However, when I think about what Takahashi Makoto is completing at the moment, it will be the last comic of a certain middle-class cartoonist's career. After finishing the draft, the words I originally wanted to reprimand were stuck in my throat and I couldn't say them out no matter what. How to put it, if you want to talk about the reason, maybe you can understand it just by listing some common things in life, right? Because I am still a child, even when I make mistakes or even commit crimes, I can still be forgiven. Because I am already an octogenarian, I cannot blame or scold me even when I violate my moral bottom line. Because I am poor, I can still gain sympathy even if I commit crimes of robbery and murder. Because he is a weak person, no matter how cruel he does, he can still be forgiven. The behavior of a certain middle-class cartoonist does not seem to be as excessive as the above, but in terms of results, isn't the submission and indulgence of a certain editor-in-chief Yoshida the same as those mentioned before? Because this will be the last comic strip by a certain middle-class cartoonist, so as long as a certain middle-class cartoonist does not go too far and uses too exaggerated methods, as the editor-in-chief of the weekly, Yoshida represents the weekly, you can forgive all the actions of a middle-class cartoonist. Even like this, the behavior of staying up late to catch up on manuscripts has been banned many times by Yoshida. So, you understand why Yoshida couldn't speak a few times. In a sense, Yoshida, the editor-in-chief of a certain weekly magazine, had an indulgent attitude toward a middle-class cartoonist, which was actually a completely different kind of moral kidnapping. My beloved cat, the way you look like you want to talk but are unwilling to say anything, really makes me unhappy. Makoto Takahashi, who was drawing a manga manuscript, did not raise his head, but it seems that he can spy on Yoshida's every move, although I don't require you to speak out like a certain ninja who eventually became Cage, but I can guarantee that if my familiar cat you don't give me a reasonable explanation, if so, I will definitely kill you later. Cheng, the cartoon manuscript you completed when you were mentally deficient. A certain editor with a strong desire for survival carefully observed the expression on the face of a middle-grade cartoonist. Once he found something wrong, Yoshida shut up immediately. Even in such a tense state, a certain editor-in-chief Yoshida is still fulfilling his duties as an editor-in-chief. Of course, I'm not worried that Cheng's current state will affect the completion of the comic manuscript. I just feel that, since Cheng, you have decided that this will be your last serialized comic, then, there's no need to work so hard to finish the manga, right? My beloved cat, do you think I want to do this? After listening to Yoshida's words, Takahashi Makoto suddenly stopped waving his brush and raised his head to look at Yoshida, the resentment on the face of a certain middle school cartoonist. The full expression simply refreshed the outlook of the editor-in-chief of a certain weekly magazine. 37 times, Hunden. 37 times, what the hell is that? I don't know why, when hearing such a feeble complaint from a middle-class cartoonist, the editor-in-chief of a certain weekly suddenly felt a secret feeling. Even though he was unconsciously, Jean began to understand the true meaning of pleasure, but at this time, Yoshida still tried his best to hide it. Trying hard to maintain a look of surprise and curiosity on his face, the editor-in-chief of a certain weekly magazine asked, I'm talking about Aiken, what we were just talking about was your manuscript. My beloved cat, I said the same thing, Hunden. Makoto Takahashi suddenly seemed to be going crazy. slapping the table with both hands and roaring at Yoshida with gritted teeth. The king of Black Flame has such a weak soul. In order to see the content of the next chapter, he called me more than 30 times last night to urge me. Even turning off the phone is useless. That idiot is actually in the big hall. He ran outside my castle in the middle of the night and kept provoking and knocking on the door. This. Based on what was described by a middle-class cartoonist, Yoshida recreated the entire process in his mind, and then, the corner of a certain editor's mouth began to twitch violently. And the most important thing is, last night, when I finally convinced the witch and prepared to make reasonable use of the voice actor's advantages and unlock new poses with the updated gameplay. A certain middle-level cartoonist who became more and more angry as he spoke, slapped her hard again. When he got off the table, he let out an earth-shattering roar. If it hadn't been for the witch's comfort and entanglement last night, humph, I would have definitely chopped that guy, the king of Black Flames, into minced meat. Hundan. I see. Now Yoshida finally understands why Eiji, the new wife who had made an agreement with him before to come to a certain Chennai manga home to observe comics, decisively refused and hung up the phone immediately when he received his invitation today. But having said that, since you, Makoto Takahashi, now hate Eiji Niizuma so much, why did you stay up all night to finish the comic? Could this be the legendary saying no but being honest tsundere? Hey, my cat, the look in your eyes now, do you want me to send you directly to Inmei? Makoto Takahashi, who noticed that Yoshida was about to complain about his tsundere in his eyes, threatened him fiercely, and then showed a nearly broken smile on his face. The bastard of the Black Flame King, want to read the comics, right? Want to know the subsequent plot, right? In that case, then be prepared to be crushed into slag. Ha 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 ha. Being able to crush a certain Chuyunabaku manga artist who has always only played others badly, in a sense, Eiji Niizuma seems to have achieved a very remarkable achievement. However, when it comes to comics, Yoshida is quite skeptical about the statement of a certain Chuyunabaku manga artist that this comic can crush Eiji Niizuma into slag. Because Yoshida has already read the first episode, the level of this manga called Steins Gate, let alone being compared with the currently popular Fate series, even if it is placed on the weekly magazine, it can only be regarded as an average work at best. My beloved cat, your suspicious eyes, I have already felt it. Although Takahashi Makoto is in a slightly bad state at this moment due to anger and insomnia, this does not mean that a certain Chuyuni cartoonist has lost the ability to observe micro-expressions at the level of mind reading. Before you see that key plot, you know nothing about the true meaning of this manga. In other words, the key content of this manga is in the second or third episode. Ignoring the mocking tone of a certain Chuyuni cartoonist, looking at the other party's confident attitude, Yoshida subconsciously said, "Sure enough, it's just as Mr. Nazuma Eiji expected, bad." Mentioning Nazuma Eiji at this time is like adding fuel to the fire for a certain Chuyuni cartoonist. My beloved cat, you, commit seppuku 10,000 times to apologize. Sure enough, Yoshida, you stepped on the minefield again. Well, actually, a certain cat was forced to eat cat food by Pikachu and Satoshi yesterday. I'm not recommending the movie. Especially when Pikachu said "tell White," a certain cat burst into tears and knelt down. A middle school cartoonist. Author, Mao Do Sde Mao. Chapter 694. After enduring the ridicule and death threats from a middle-class cartoonist, the editor-in-chief of a weekly magazine finally acquired the manga manuscripts for the second and third chapters of the comic Steins Gate. In every sense, Yoshida, the work is really hard. However, after Yoshida got the manga manuscript, he did not rush to observe it immediately. Instead, he looked at a certain second-level cartoonist with suspicious eyes. Because of the two-chapter manga manuscript, it is absolutely impossible to complete this amount in one night. Done. This is true even for a certain second-rate cartoonist who masters the super speed skill and even cheats. Therefore, Yoshida said that there is only one truth. The manga manuscript in his hand now, is definitely drawn or prepared by a certain Chennai manga a long time ago. Nani, my beloved cat, do you have any dissatisfaction, seeing that Yoshida had not started to look through the manga manuscript? A middle-level cartoonist urged impatiently, as mentioned in advance, with your current level of strength, my familiar cat, it is absolutely impossible for you to exempt me from the spell that affects people's hearts hidden in the comic manuscript, so don't try to delay time and be calm like a man. To death. I'm talking about Chang, are you sure about these manga manuscripts? Yoshida shook the manga manuscripts in his hand a little frivolously. Yoshida stared at a middle-grade cartoonist with unkind eyes and asked suspiciously, really, did you finish it all last night? Are you really sure that these weren't prepared before? How presumptuous! My beloved cat, who gave you the courage to question the great Demon King, His Majesty the Phoenix Academy? A certain middle-class cartoonist who had transformed into an arrogant Demon King immediately responded to Yoshida's question. He retorted, don't compare ordinary humans like you to me, my beloved cat, don't forget, what you are facing right now is the strongest Mad Demon King in history. Yes, I know. When Takahashi Saichuji is full of rage, Yoshida will always subconsciously choose to retreat, just as someone once said, although the behavior is the same, strategic retreat does not mean admitting defeat. Yoshida does not think that to choose to retreat at this time is to admit defeat. Although judging from the momentum, Yoshida has indeed been crushed by a certain middle-class cartoonist, but it has to be said that this is the wise thing Yoshida has made over the years in his capacity as a certain middle-class cartoonist's editor choose. Because if you continue to argue or debate with a certain middle-class cartoonist, not to mention that the editor-in-chief of a certain weekly magazine has no time to observe the cartoon manuscript, I am afraid that even your own life will be affected by the mental oppression of a certain middle-class cartoonist, and the interference of words will permanently affect you, so that you will eventually become the puppet of the other party who controls your destiny. At this time, you should decisively use the reason that the editor should discuss comics-related matters with the cartoonist after observing the cartoon manuscript as an excuse. Thinking of this, Yoshida started to turn over the comics with an expressionless face. After reading the manuscript, he comforted the alpaca, who started to wave his power fist in his heart, and quickly got out of the battle circle. Hey! At this moment, I finally understand how the former captain felt. Sure enough, this kind of dissatisfaction can really make people quite unhappy. Watching Yoshida start to read the manga manuscript, even though he was quite satisfied with the pleasure he got today, a certain middle-level cartoonist still curled his lips in displeasure and stared at Yoshida. There was nothing like that hunter-like look in his eyes. This proves beyond doubt that at this moment, a certain middle-class cartoonist is preparing to launch a fatal attack the moment Yoshida reveals his flaw. There is no middle-class cartoonist looking at him with eager eyes. At this moment, the editor-in-chief of the weekly magazine has focused all his attention on the cartoon manuscript in his hand with an unprecedented attitude. Nyaizuma Ag has said before that in the manga called Steins Gate, the key points that make the plot span from the ordinary level to the legendary level are likely to appear in the second or third episode of the manga. In the content, the entire editorial side of the weekly magazine has almost blindly worshipped Eiji Nyazuma's prophetic ability, which is almost like cheating. Even though Eiji Nyaizuma once said before that he could not predict the direction of the manga plot of a certain middle-class cartoonist, however, Yoshida, who is on the editorial side of the weekly, still has no doubts about Eiji Nyazuma's speculation. Not to mention, what made Yoshida somewhat concerned was the attitude of a certain middle-class cartoonist. As the editor of a weekly magazine, Yoshida naturally has not seen many cartoonists who come to contribute to the weekly magazine, but for someone like a middle-class cartoonist who has such a confident attitude towards his comics, Yoshida said that he is really alive. See you soon. The plot of the first chapter of the comic stops just when the male protagonist hears the scream, and at the beginning of the serialized content of this chapter, the plot of the story does not have any magical twists or jumps, but follows the previous chapter. The content continues. The narrative mode of the comic manuscript almost follows the actions of the male protagonist in the comic. What Yoshida couldn't help but want to complain about is that in this comic manuscript, the description of the background scene by a middle-level cartoonist is simply meticulous to an outrageous degree. Whether it was the stairwell he was passing by or the door of the room he was passing by, the alternating lines of light and dark even gave Yoshida a similar feeling as I am also walking in a dark corridor. Is this the magic technique to influence people's hearts that Chen mentioned? Yoshida, who was observing, couldn't help but whispered in surprise. No, in fact, what really shocked Yoshida was the delicate painting style used by a certain Chuyuni cartoonist in this comic. Not to mention the changes in the assistants under the Chuyuni cartoonist. When it comes to the person who is most familiar with the painting style of a certain Chuyuni cartoonist, Yoshida can undoubtedly be ranked first. After all, Yoshida, the editor-in-chief of a weekly magazine, had been in a fate called bad luck since he became the editor-in-chief of a certain Chuyuni manga artist many years ago. I have seen the beautiful painting style in the manga Inuyasha. I have also seen the wild painting style in the manga Ushio and Tora. I have also seen the two completely opposite painting styles in the manga One Punch Man Magic Twisted version and One Punch Man serialized Hot Blood version. Originally, Yoshida thought he had understood the painting style of a certain Chuyuni manga artist enough. But now, looking at the different painting style of the comic manuscript in his hand, the editor-in-chief of a certain weekly magazine realized that he seemed to be too naive. And more importantly, speaking of the style of these comics, I think, it seems, I have seen it before. Is it an illusion? My beloved cat, you didn't see it. A certain Chuyunibaku cartoonist seemed very satisfied with Yoshida's surprised expression at the moment, and smiled and reminded, think about it carefully, my beloved cat, you definitely know it. It should be Nakai-san, who is now the assistant of Hiramaru-kun, right? Tisk. It was so easy to guess. The Chuyunibaku cartoonist who was originally smiling immediately changed to a depressed look. Sure enough, the imitation is still not good enough. No, even if it is imitating the other party's style, it can be so detailed. Ah-chan, you are definitely a foul-level existence. Of course, in order to avoid being ridiculed by a certain Chuyunibaku cartoonist, Yoshida did not say the second half of the boasting. Oh my, I want to easily master the state of no self. A certain Chuyunibaku cartoonist ignored the amazement in Yoshida's eyes and sighed to himself, I was too naive to have such an idea. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. A middle school cartoonist. Author, Mao Do Sde Mao. Chapter 695. Although he was amazed by the sudden change of painting style of a certain second-grade cartoonist, Yoshida hesitated for a moment just because of his surprise, and then continued to look through the cartoon manuscript in his hand. Speaking of the delicate painting style, although it will indeed have a certain impact on many readers, for most readers, they are naturally immune to the interference from the painting style. After all, for readers, for readers who have observed a large number of comic manuscripts, what really determines the quality of comics is actually the quality of the comics themselves. As the editor-in-chief of the weekly, Yoshida will naturally not be deceived by the exquisite painting style. He tries his best to ignore the urge in his heart to complain about the painting style, and tries his best to focus on the plot content of the comic. After all, so far, Yoshida has not discovered the key point plot predicted by A.G. Shinzuma before. Pushing open the ajar door, what caught his eyes was a girl lying in a pool of blood. Although the male protagonist has shown two cute attributes of Shuyunibu and persecution delusion in the first chapter of the comic, This does not mean that the male protagonist in a white coat is a lackluster person. Common sense guy? Anyone with a little bit of common sense knows that when you find yourself at the scene of a crime, even if you are not regarded as a suspect by some guy with the aura of death, you will at least be taken to the bureau to interrogate the transcript, and with the male protagonist Rintaro Okabe, who has a delusion of being murdered, will have more and more complicated thoughts when facing this kind of murder scene. So at this moment, the brain does not need to think too much, the body is the first to respond before the mind. Escape the scene. Escape the scene quickly. Try your best to escape from the scene. After finding his childhood sweetheart Mayuri, Okabe Rintaro immediately fled to the street with him. If this is a mystery comic, the subsequent plot development will first see the appearance of a certain detective with the aura of death, then the police will slowly come in with onlookers mixed with the real murderer, and then the victims will be exposed in front of the corpse. The dark history of the film reveals the ugliest side of human nature. In the end, a famous detective finds the decisive clues based on the clues at the crime scene and various conversations, and a group of uncles and aunts who only call 666 point out the murderer while watching, and successfully gain fame, wealth, and a huge amount of satisfaction. But unfortunately, the comic called Steins Gate that Yoshida is observing at the moment is not a mystery comic, so naturally there will be no famous detective. Although he has just experienced various frightening events, as long as he blends into the crowd, even if he does not talk to anyone, he can get rid of the previous uneasiness and fear in a short period of time. Human beings are really strange creatures. In the true sense, what scares humans is actually humans themselves, right? The male protagonist Rintaro Okabe is just like ordinary people in this regard. When Rintaro Okabe took Mayuri into the crowd, his originally panicked heart gradually calmed down, and he even sent a message to his friends. Got a text message? It's unexpectedly ordinary. Yoshida stopped reading the manga manuscript again. He looked up at Makoto Takahashi with some helplessness and confusion, and murmured in a low voice, although I admit that the protagonist is similar to someone because it's extremely high, but that's it, right? At least until now, I don't feel that the character Chunnabu has promoted the development of the entire comic. In terms of character design, although the male protagonist's Chuyunibu setting is a bit strange, and it is slightly different from the performance of a certain Chuyunibu manga artist that Yoshida is familiar with, this is not a big problem. After all, no matter what kind of work they are in, characters with weird attributes will be easily recognizable to readers. In other words, works without characters don't actually exist at all, right? But if the character's personality is not well integrated with the work, which is what the saying goes, the fit is not high. No matter how brilliant the character is, no matter how good the plot is, it will not save the work from failure. Fate, right? For example, if a certain Xaotian character who has been complained about many times is placed in a work with a rigorous setting such as steel, if it is used as a fan, it may have a very good effect, but it undoubtedly destroyed the structural rigor of the original work, causing many layouts of this comic to directly collapse, and the plot to fall directly from the altar. This is a classic case of character design and comics not being well matched. So you understand why Yoshida would express such emotion? Regarding the character design of the manga Steins Gate, if calculated on a 100-point scale, Yoshida can definitely give 9 points to the characters currently appearing in the manga, namely the male protagonist Rintaro Okabe and Mayuri, who is temporarily the female protagonist. More than 10 points, but judging from what Yoshida has observed so far, it can only be 30 points at most. Moreover, this score can only be given after the death of Maka's Kurisu, the girl who took on the appearance and received the lunch in the manga. Ah-Cheng, you guy, even if it is the last serialized work, there is no need to be so willful and let yourself go so freely, right? It's really to use such a general and ordinary plot as the final work. Originally, Yoshida wanted to use this way of complaining to persuade a middle-class cartoonist to modify the plot. But after turning to the next page of the manga, Yoshida couldn't say anything about the complaint-like persuasion that originally came to his lips. Because in the comics, after Okabe Rentaro sent the message, the whole world changed. In the comic draft, a string of numbers with unknown meaning was deliberately given a close-up scene, and then, when Okabe Rentaro regained consciousness after a brief blur, he found himself suddenly in a world that looked like a dead city. The building that was originally crowded with onlookers. The crowded intersection. The busy streets. The noisy voices. All disappeared. What? This is. Looking at the sudden strange change in the picture in the comic, Yoshida was stunned again, scratched his head in confusion, and after a moment of silence, he said in a resentful tone, Is this the key plot that Nazuma Ag mentioned? But I don't understand it at all. So what exactly happened? It is obvious that Yoshida deliberately asked doubts in order to attract the attention of a certain Chuyuni cartoonist, and then as usual, while answering questions and solving doubts, he also mocked himself. Of course, for a certain Chuyuni cartoonist, answering is only secondary or incidental, and the main thing is to mock Yoshida to get pleasure. But this time, a certain Chuyuni cartoonist did not pay attention to Yoshida, but hugged his legs, curled up in a chair, staring at the comic on the table and wandering in the sky. Yoshida used the fascination skill on Takahashi Makoto. Takahashi Makoto was not affected because of his characteristic slowness. After Yoshida sensed from the corner of his eye that a certain Chuyunibaku manga artist had no intention of paying attention to him, he stood up with the manga manuscript in his hand, ready to tell the other party his doubts directly. However, after Yoshida took only one step, he suddenly stopped, took back his steps, and sat back on the sofa. Forget it, I'd better finish reading the rest of the manga manuscript first. I want to emphasize that the reason why Yoshida changed his mind temporarily was actually just to fulfill the obligation of the editor in charge should comment after reading the manga manuscript. It's definitely not because he is afraid of a certain Chuyunibaku manga artist. Well, absolutely not. A middle school cartoonist. Author, Mao Do Sde Mao. Chapter 696. Chapter 696 The news that the Yachin Mu Menjai Good Friend group heard that day. Although they are already married, the lifestyle of Landai and the yellow-haired glasses guy has not changed much. They spend more time in the comic studio every day than at home. Like his usual behavior habits, Landai is leaning over the table, meticulously completing the comic draft, while the yellow-haired glasses guy scratches his head from time to time, and then writes and draws on the desk. This is the usual mode of Yachin Mu Menjai Good Friend group creating comics. One is responsible for conceiving the plot, and the other is responsible for converting the text and the rough and distorted Soul Painter's magic storyboard into comic drafts. However, what is slightly different from usual is that on the desks of both Landai and Huangmao Glasses, there is an unopened weekly comic book Shonen Jump. Whether it is Landai who is finishing the draft or Huangmao Glasses who is thinking about the plot, they will shift their attention to the weekly magazine from time to time. On weekdays, the two will not be distracted when working, but today is a little different. After all, today is the date of the new issue of the weekly magazine. Also, it is the issue that serializes the final episode of the comic Fate. Maybe he wants to change his mind, or maybe he is a little tired from thinking about the plot for a long time. In short, Huangmao Glasses, who found many reasons for himself in his heart, finally couldn't help but pick up the weekly magazine on the table under the resentful eyes of his good friend, directly opened the package, and conveyed the message of "I'll enjoy it first" to the other party with his eyes, and prepared to start observing the comics. Akito, have you thought about the plot of the next manga? Because he still had unfinished manga manuscripts, Landai could only vent his resentment of not being able to observe the weekly magazine with words. Also, didn't we agree to watch it together before? By the way, why are you always like this? Sorry, Supreme. After clasping his hands together to apologize to his best friend, A certain yellow-haired man with glasses threw all the reasons for his idleness, because my mind is full of speculations about the ending of the manga fate. By the way, in my current state, are you sure that the plot I wrote is really okay? If it's Akito, it should be okay, probably. Regarding the reasons of his best friend, Landai said with the determination of not trusting you, but trusting the me who believes in you, but from the tone, not only can't the existence of trust be felt at all, but it seems more like a lack of confidence. However, Landai expressed his understanding of his best friend's explanation. Because not to mention that the good friend was too eager. In fact, even Landai himself, because of his curiosity about the ending of the comic fate, couldn't calm down and put his soul and emotions into the comic draft in front of him with a brush as usual. And I'm also curious, why can a comic like Fate that we are good at evil ways achieve such overwhelming popularity in the weekly magazine? It is also a comic of evil ways, and it was completed by the two cartoonists who are not good at this type of work. Even if it took advantage of the popularity of the two cartoonists, it shouldn't have achieved such a result that almost crushed other comics in the weekly magazine. The yellow-haired man with glasses, who was halfway through his words, suddenly saw the lost look of his good friend, and decisively swallowed the second half of the sentence back. The finale of the comic fate, Landai muttered softly, and the brush in his hand stopped involuntarily. He stared at the weekly magazine on the table, his eyes showing loss and unwillingness. After a long silence, he whispered in a faint tone, "Really? That comic, has it reached the end?" At this time, the yellow-haired glasses man who should have comforted his good friend could not say his words of comfort as skillfully and fluently as usual. No, the yellow-haired glasses man could not even open his mouth. No matter what kind of plot that killed the readers appeared during the serialization of the comic fate, no matter what kind of magical twists and turns appeared in the plot of the serialized comic fate, since the serialization of the comic fate, the good friends Yachin Mu Menjai have never won once. Yes, whether it is a reader survey or various popularity surveys conducted by the weekly magazine, the good friends Yachin Mu Menjai have never won once. If it were other types of comics, it would be fine. After all, after years of baptism and tempering, the good friends, Yachin Mu Menjai, have already determined that compared with the kingly comics, the cartoonist Yachin Mu Menjai is better at evil comics. But this comic called Fate is more inclined to the evil comics. In the field that he is good at, he was completely defeated by a cartoonist who is not good at this field, and he was crushed from all aspects from the plot to the character setting, leaving him with no power to fight back. If it were an ordinary cartoonist, this kind of frustration and humiliation, maybe he would have already turned on the life loser mode and fled in embarrassment. In a sense, the combination of Yachin Mu Menjai and the good friends is definitely quite strong and tough in their hearts. Ever since Landai made an ambiguous comment, the studio of Yashiro Mu Menjai has fallen into a dead silence. The two people, each with their own thoughts, let alone discussing comics happily as usual, I'm afraid the two of them now don't even have the mind to observe comics, right? However, the silent atmosphere was soon broken by the vibrating mobile phone on the table. Although I really want to say that it's really a good time to call at this time, but when the yellow-haired glasses guy picked up the phone and saw the caller ID, his expression suddenly changed. He gestured to his good friend and immediately turned on the hands-free to answer the call. Although I also know that usually at this time, Takagi-kun and Mashiro-kun, you should be completing the creation of comics, and I shouldn't call to disturb you. The voice on the other end of the phone was the editor-in-chief of Yashiro Mu Menjai, Uncle Hattori. But I think some of the news I just heard needs to be, no, it should be said that I must tell you. Hattori-san, there's something wrong with our comics. Landai, who had already walked quickly to the side of the yellow-haired man with glasses, suddenly became a little nervous and asked loudly on the phone, could it be that the weekly magazine is planning to cut our comics? It is normal for Landai's classmates to have such speculations. After all, today is not only the day when the new issue of the weekly magazine is released, but also the day when some new serials are decided, and some unpopular comics are cut off. Maki-kun, although the popularity of your comics has declined recently, it is not to be cut off, hehe. After completing the task of using habitual catchphrases, the tone of the editor Hattori suddenly changed. You probably haven't had time to read today's weekly magazine yet? I'll tell you in advance that after the comic Fate is finished, the next comic by Eiji Nizuma is called Fate Stay Night, and just at the serialization meeting, it was confirmed that it will be officially serialized from the next issue. This name. The good friends looked at each other and asked impatiently, is it the sequel to the manga Fate? It should be like this. After all, many of the new serialized characters have also appeared in the manga Fate, and the editor Hattori on the other end of the phone seemed to hesitate for a moment before deciding to continue telling the good friends Yachin Mumanjai some explosive news. Takahashi Makoto, that is, Mr. Howinkuma, also submitted a new manga at the serialization meeting, and it was also decided to start serialization in the next issue. Aiken, that guy, is he planning to start dual serialization again? Well, Landai classmates started to complain again. Wait, Hattori-san, if I heard it right. Compared with good friends, the yellow-haired glasses man's ability to analyze information is visually stronger. Aiken and Nizuma AG are planning to serialize separately in the next issue of the weekly. Well, Nizuma AG's manga is Fate Stay Night, and the manga by Howinkuma is Steins Gate, and the editor Hattori on the other end of the phone pondered for a moment before slowly continuing. According to Yoshida-kun, the manga named Steins Gate will be the last serialized work by the manga artist Howinkuma, a middle school cartoonist. Author, Mao Do Sde Mao. Chapter 697. Is this the last manga of Phoenix Academy's Fierce God? Listening to this title, coupled with the tone of the exclamation filled with respect and admiration, you know that the person who shouted out is the little sea otter who is under the same command of the weekly editor-in-chief Yoshida as a certain second-grade cartoonist. Holding the little sea otter that was being observed by the manga weekly, after hearing the news Yoshida said, his face showed the surprise expected by a shady editor. He lowered his head and read several pages of comics in succession, and then raised his head, stare at Yoshida with those dead fish eyes that have dark bags under his eyes due to lack of sleep. Mr. Yoshida, are you sure about the accuracy of the news? Hiramaru-kun, do you think I would deceive you about this kind of thing? Listening to the little sea otter's question, Yoshida spread his hands helplessly and said with a complicated expression, although at the beginning, I also considered, however, maybe this guy Cheng is playing tricks on me, but at the serialization meeting, the editor-in-chief has confirmed that after the completion of this comic called Steins Gate, the cartoonist Shoin Yoshima also I will quit the circle of cartoonists from now on. Ah, how could this happen? Why is this happening? The little sea otter threw the comic magazine aside, grabbed his head with both hands, shook it, and muttered in an unbelievable tone. By the way, when I heard the news, I was quite surprised. Seeing the little sea otter fall into a state of frenzy, Yoshida sighed with some regret. Hiramaru-kun, you must be like me, it is difficult to accept this. Really? Mr. Yoshida, regarding the retirement of Lord Phoenix Academy's fierce god. Listening to Yoshida's comfort, the little sea otter finally woke up from the state of madness. His eyes stared blankly at Yoshida. After a long silence, he said word for word, this kind of thing, I will never accept it. If you want that guy Cheng to change his mind, it's going to be very difficult. Seeing the little sea otter's expression of listening attentively, Yoshida nodded with satisfaction, then tried hard to suppress the urge to laugh, and said in a calm tone, Cheng has said before that if anyone can complete the mission achievement of defeating the final enemy, Phoenix Academy murder after the key plot of the comic Steins Gate appears, maybe things will turn around. Yoshida, are you telling the truth? The little sea otter grabbed Yoshida tightly with both hands and asked again and again, It is hard to imagine that the little sea otter who usually wants to escape to the outside of the earth when he sees Yoshida would actually make this move. Of course, Yoshida looked a little unnatural, turned his head and said softly. Obviously, Yoshida is deceiving the little sea otter. After all, with the character of the little sea otter, when faced with a strategy called inciting general method, the effect is outstanding. Yoshida has always used this method to enslave, no, it should be said to supervise. Little sea otter has completed the serialization. However, what Yoshida did not expect was that the effect of using Takahashi Makoto's final serialization to stimulate the little sea otter, actually far exceeded his original expectations. Although Hirameru-kun is usually treated like a toy by that guy Chang. Seeing the little sea otter throwing himself on the table and starting to draw the manga, Yoshida couldn't help complaining in his heart, but not only did he not notice it, but respect Chang. Well, if that's the case, at least until the manga Steins Gate is finished, you don't have to worry about Hirameru-kun delaying the publication of the manga or anything like that. Unfortunately, Yoshida's pleasure did not last too long. Lord Phoenix Academy, fierce god, you actually abandoned your devout believers and escaped from the sea of misery alone. The little sea otter, who was quickly drawing the cartoon draft, kept mumbling, sure enough, you also think that the profession of cartoonist will it greatly drag down your life? The smile on Yoshida's face began to stiffen, and the corners of his mouth began to twitch. If you, Lord Phoenix Academy, fierce god, had told me earlier, maybe I would be like you, Wait, the little sea otter seemed to suddenly think of something, and a look of I only discovered the truth now appeared on his face. With a regretful expression, he turned to stare at Yoshida and timidly said, Yoshida, I suddenly have a bold idea. Seeing the little sea otter hesitate to speak, Yoshida slapped his forehead hard, and then said angrily, Hirameru-kun, as long as I am in the weekly, your unrealistic behavior, don't even think about succeeding in your delusion. The little sea otter exclaimed, looking at Yoshida in surprise, but Mr. Yoshida, I haven't said anything yet. You want to imitate that guy Chang, and plan to give up your career as a cartoonist after serializing this comic, right? Looking at the horrifying expression on the little sea otter's face, Yoshida, you actually know what I'm thinking. Yoshida was a bit dumbfounded at the simple-minded little sea otter. Let's not talk about whether the editor-in-chief will allow it, Hirameru-kun, as long as you can continue to serialize for 1 year like Chang did, maybe I will consider your proposal. Just a moment. Serial, for 1 year? Uninterrupted, seeing Yoshida nodding in recognition, the little sea otter's face instantly turned pale, trembling and taking a few steps back, and asked with some horror, Yoshida, do you want me to die? Huh, Yoshida's expression was quite interesting at this moment. He quickly caught up with the little sea otter who wanted to escape, clamped his head with both hands, and said with a fake smile, Hey, Hirameru-kun, I really didn't expect you would actually say such unprofessional words as a cartoonist. For cartoonists, serializing for a year is the most basic requirement, right? But if it were me, I would die if I serialized for a year. I would definitely die. Perhaps because Yoshida had restrained his head, the little sea otter accidentally said his true thoughts. Hirameru-kun, I know you want to rest. Yoshida suddenly gave up the punishment on the little sea otter. After motioning for him to sit down, Yoshida changed his previous fierce tone and said softly with a smile, if you can stick to the 3-day period, if you want to serialize the comics for a month without interruption, I can ask the editor-in-chief for a month's rest. How about that? A month's rest? Little Otter didn't seem to notice the prerequisite. His eyes lit up. Mr. Yoshida, I knew, you are indeed my best partner. Of course. After all, I am your editor-in-chief, Mr. Hiramaru. Resisting the urge to beat Little Otter, Yoshida tried to maintain a smile on his face. If Mr. Hiramaru can guarantee that in the future serialization, the number of interruptions within a year will not exceed 10 times, then after this comic is finished, I will apply to the editor-in-chief to give you a year, no, half a year's rest. Oh, half a year's rest, if just now, there was only a glimmer of light in Little Otter's eyes, then now, this dazzling light is almost blinding. Mr. Yoshida, you are indeed a responsible editor with a conscience. Well, come on, here American. For your half-year break. Yoshida encouraged the little otter and tapped the table with his fingers, hurry up and finish the comics you should finish. Oh. For a break. It is obvious that the little otter has been tempted by the big promise made by a responsible editor. In this way, here American can at least maintain the serialization for a month, right? Looking at the little otter who started to draw the comics in a hurry, Yoshida's smile flashed across his face. He picked up the weekly magazine that was thrown aside by the little otter and began to read the latest episode of Steins Gate. The problem now is Aiken. Although the performance of the comic Steins Gate is quite good from the current serialized content, it is not as good as Yoshida's expectations compared to other comics serialized by a certain middle school cartoonist in the past. And from the perspective of the plot, Mr. Yoshida. The little otter suddenly collapsed on the table like a deflated balloon, struggling weakly and saying, I feel like I've burned out, if I continue to draw, I will definitely die. The little otter's almost dying call interrupted Yoshida's thinking, and the editor-in-chief of a certain weekly magazine instantly looked gloomy. Because it was only 3 minutes since the little otter turned on the hot-blooded cartoonist mode. In other words, the little otter who had vowed before was completely exhausted after 3 minutes. Mr. Yoshida, I can't do it anymore. The little otter, who didn't notice Yoshida's gloomy face and suddenly lazy cancer broke out, sighed weakly, if I continue to draw like this, I don't know whether Hunter will end first or I will die first. You should die first. Hiramaru-kun, no, old thief Hiramaru. This name. Sure enough, Mr. Yoshida has gone berserk. The title is exactly what a cat wants to say recently. I feel exhausted, really. I accompanied the senior leader on an inspection tour, and I didn't get home before 12 o'clock this week. I wrote meeting minutes until my hands were tired, and I finished half a notebook in a week. When I was typing today, I realized that taking a half-day break was such a happy thing. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. A middle school cartoonist. Author, MaleProtagonist email. Chapter 698. Chapter 698 Disadvantage or Failure. The manga Steins Gate has been serialized for a while. For the editor-in-chief, it should be a cause for celebration that the cartoonist he is responsible for has submitted a new serialization. For example, when the Good Friend group he is responsible for was successfully approved for serialization for the first time, a certain uncle with a sea urchin head on the editorial side generously invited 2 young boys who were not familiar with the world to have a barbecue meal. However, as the editor-in-chief of the manga Steins Gate, Yoshida could not find a reason to be happy, nor did he put on a very happy smile in front of his colleagues on the editorial side as usual. Instead, he did not know when he had gathered an indissoluble sorrow between his eyebrows. It's not just because this manga called Steins Gate is the last manga of a certain Chuyuni cartoonist. More importantly, it's because the performance of this manga, which is called the last work of a certain Chuyuni cartoonist, is a bit disappointing. Well, it's not wrong to put it euphemistically. 10th place. Looking at the data displayed on the comic performance statistics in his hand, Yoshida's face flashed with a as expected look, and he sighed helplessly, leaned back on the chair with his hands on his head, closed his eyes, and released his resentment in an unwilling tone. Continuous serialization of that kind of daily plot, I just knew it would be like this. To be honest, the beginning of the comic Steins Gate is very good, at least Yoshida, the editor-in-chief of the first observation, was very interested in the many foreshadowings buried in the comic. But that was only when it was first serialized. The girl who was suspected to be the heroine came back to life, and the male protagonist with the second-year syndrome discovered that he had the superpower to travel through time. This should be the main plot, right? If this plot is developed, relying on the abnormal thinking mode of a certain second-year cartoonist that is different from normal humans, although Yoshida dare not guarantee that this comic will be a big hit, he can at least guarantee that this comic will occupy an upper-middle level among the comics serialized in the same period of the weekly. But look at the recent serialization. The main storyline is stuck in the plot where the girl joins the laboratory of the middle school male protagonist and begins to study time travel. As the subsequent plots of the manga Steins Gate are gradually serialized, more and more characters are added. These development models that were originally adopted for many comics have become the culprit for the decline in the performance of the manga Steins Gate. Yes, the appearance of new characters does make the comics interesting, and Yoshida does not deny this, but these new characters have no effect on the development of the main storyline of the comics. On the contrary, it is better to say that the reason why this kind of daily plot is serialized with multiple episodes is that a middle school cartoonist provides a chance for a small role to appear in a group. Yoshida had persuaded a certain Chuyunabaku manga artist, but my beloved cat, this is the choice of Steins Gate. It would be fine if Yoshida's persuasion was only repelled by the argument that the power was greatly increased by the blessing of the manga, but the more important thing is, I don't deny that the early stage is at a disadvantage, but this manga is the type that is invincible in the later stage. Hey, my beloved cat, haven't you read the relevant literature on protracted war? If you are strong in the early stage but not in the later stage, not only will you be easily reversed, but it is also said that you will easily become the inheritor of forgiveness color. Suffering from this mental attack with a vicious curse, a responsible editor said that if his martial arts value could be confronted head-on, he would definitely challenge a certain Chuyunabaku manga artist to a duel called to death. Oh, as expected, it's number one again this time, Yoshida, who seemed to be resting with his eyes closed, but was actually thinking about how to kill, no, how to persuade a certain Chuyunabaku manga artist, suddenly heard a colleague's smug voice. He opened his eyes and saw Yujiro holding a new issue of the weekly magazine, winking at him and saying in an exaggerated manner, since the appearance of the Night King, the new series of Nezuma-kun has always been in the top 3, tisk tisk tisk, as Mr. Howinkuma said, the Night King is really the poster girl of the Fate series. Tisk. After spitting with disdain, Yoshida retorted unhappily, Yujiro, don't forget that the comics you are seeing now about the Fate series, were all conceived by that guy Aiken. Yes, I admit this, and even Nezuma-kun said that in terms of plot conception, he is completely inferior to Mr. Howinkuma who can conceive the entire series alone. After listening to Yujiro's somewhat submissive praise, Yoshida's face looked a little better, but before Yoshida could speak, Yujiro came up with a god finishing. But unfortunately, it is Nezuma-kun who continues the comic Fate series, and it is only Nezuma-kun. Tisk. Hey, Yoshida-san, I've heard about this before. Seeing Yoshida's unhappy expression, Yujiro showed a smirk on his face. Before, Nezuma-kun suggested that the name of Howinkuma-sensei be added to the author column of this new series, but it seems that Howinkuma-sensei rejected it very decisively. Thinking back to Yoshida who seemed to be present at the time, he suddenly felt a little pain in his heart. Why did you reject it? It was obviously Howinkuma-sensei who conceived the plot first. Just as Yujiro was happily teasing Yoshida, he was suddenly hit on the head with an iron fist of sanction. Ah! It hurts. Yoshida-san, how could you do this? Aiken once told me that once you hear a similar statement as you did before, don't hesitate anymore, throw a punch. If one punch is not enough, then punch again, Yoshida, who had vented his anger, shook his fist and explained to Yujiro in a happy mood, as for the reason, according to Aiken's original words, killing the white scientist is to contribute to maintaining human harmony. Editor Hattori, who had been watching from the side, smiled habitually and fled in the hostile eyes of the two. By the way, Yoshida-san, you should persuade Mr. Howinkuma. Yujiro raised the weekly magazine in his hand, his expression became serious. If this continues, maybe the manga Steins Gate will be. Yujiro did not finish his words, but just made a throat-cutting gesture with his palm. Yeah, I know, I will persuade Aiken. Jokes aside, when talking about business, Yoshida did feel the kindness of his colleagues. It's just, forget it, Yujiro, what does Nyaizuma Ag say? Not only is the character setting super interesting, but also serializes this kind of calm and daily plot. Is Howinkuma planning to accumulate power and kill me in one move? Yujiro spread his hands helplessly and said to Yoshida with a strange look in his eyes, this is what Nyaizuma-kun said. Yujiro, you can actually say such a thing seriously. Yoshida bowed to Yujiro very seriously, sorry, I underestimated you too much before. Yujiro, who was originally in a very happy mood, recalled the tone of his voice when he just relayed Nyaizuma Agi's original words, and the whole person felt a little bad. Yujiro is right, it is indeed necessary to have a good talk with Aiken now. As Yoshida packed his briefcase, he thought. A middle school cartoonist. Author, MaleProtagonist Mao. Chapter 699. My beloved cat, I already know your purpose of coming. But it's a pity. Hey. Is it something like the time has not come yet or the secret must not be revealed again? That's right. Because this. Everything is Steins Gate's choice, right? My beloved cat, since you already know it, why do you still come to ask for confirmation in person? Alas, I still have doubts about the established facts and still have luck. Human beings are so good at deceiving themselves and others. It's sad. Species. As the editor-in-chief of the manga Steins Gate, Yoshida originally planned to have a good talk with a certain manga artist today about the current situation of the manga and discuss the subsequent plot development of the manga. After all, from the current serialization judging from the results, this comic by a certain second-grade cartoonist is likely to be cut in half due to the decline in popularity. It's a pity that Yoshida, who came with great ambitions, was quickly used by a second-grade cartoonist to use the skill of verbal induction, and a few words distorted the rhythm and direction of the conversation. Cheng, now is not the time to joke. Faced with the nonchalant attitude of a certain second-grade cartoonist, Yoshida was furious. After brewing for a long time, he finally couldn't help but explode. The performance of the last chapter of the manga Steins Gate has dropped to 10th place. If it continues like this, let alone waiting until the serialization ends, maybe it will be cut in half next month. My beloved cat, as the editor's minion, you actually worry about me as the cartoonist. Are you surrendering to the enemy on the battlefield? Makoto Takahashi looked at Yoshida strangely, and then his face he showed a disdainful smile. Give up, my beloved cat? I don't need a despicable person like you here. Cheng, aren't you worried? Ignoring the ridicule of a middle-class cartoonist, Yoshida changed his method of persuasion. As the last comic of your career as a cartoonist, Cheng, are you want the manga Steins Gate to be terminated in half, as a way of ending your career as a cartoonist? A certain middle school cartoonist suppressed the smile on his face and fell into silence. I know Cheng, you really want to retire. Yoshida, whose observation ability has been turned to the subtle level, saw the change in the expression on Takahashi Makoto's face, and immediately felt that he had found the right way to persuade a certain middle school comic in the direction of home. After pausing for a moment, he took a deep breath and began to carry out inflammatory persuasion. But Cheng, are you really planning to end like this? Aren't you ever unwilling to give in? Do you just want to be crushed and beaten by Mr. A.G. Shinzuma in the final serial showdown? Of course it won't end like this. And I'm not willing to be suppressed by the King of Black Flame. Seeing Yoshida beaming with joy, Takahashi Makoto showed a long-lost joyful smile on his face, and immediately changed the subject. I originally planned to say this, after all, seeing how enthusiastic you are about my companion cat, I feel that it would be too wasteful not to cooperate with you. This guy should definitely be sent to the root to recorrect his twisted soul. That is to say, Chang, do you plan to continue in this state and continue to serialize the kind of plot that gradually disappoints readers? Yoshida suddenly felt tired. After letting out a long sigh, he spread his hands helplessly, feeling weak. He said in a self-deprecating tone, if Chang, you really decide to do this, then I won't advise you anymore. After all, this Steins Gate is your last comic, Chang. What do you want? It's up to you how you want the painting to end. Tisk tisk tisk, my beloved cat, although I am very happy that you have this understanding. A certain middle school cartoonist looked at Yoshida, who looked a little tired, and curled his lips in dissatisfaction. But I always feel that there's something wrong with your statement. Hey, I just gave up my career as a cartoonist. I'm not a terminally ill person. You are too worried. By the way, Yoshida, could you please tell me, what was going on with that brief silence before you answered? Oh, my beloved cat, actually I didn't plan to tell you originally, but it seems I can't do it now. Seeing a glint of hope flashing in Yoshida's eyes, a certain middle school student, the second cartoonist's face was full of helplessness. After all, you, my beloved cat, are a big dog who provide me with pleasure. If you are depressed, I don't have toys to play with, but I will feel very bored. Although Aiken, you are finally willing to say it. Yoshida looked dumbfounded. But why don't I have the slightest idea of gratitude, but instead want to give you a good beating? My beloved cat, that's it? That's right. A certain second-grade cartoonist seemed to be very satisfied with the performance of his editor-in-charge. With a joyful smile on his face, I want to see, that's the expression you have right now, my beloved cat, you can't stand me but can't kill me. By the way, what a bad taste this is. There is simply no cure. Again, complaints are complaints. Yoshida is quite serious when talking about business. Chang, you can start talking now. So, don't underestimate the weekly editor. How should I put it? Facing Yoshida, who was sitting upright, a certain Chuanibiao cartoonist was pinching his chin and looking erratic. It didn't look like he wanted to analyze it seriously, but more like he was running his brain quickly to fool people. My beloved cat, the reason why I serialized such a plot for a long time is actually just to test it. Test? Test who? Is it Mr. Nazuma AG or, hey, it can't be. Yoshida looked at Takahashi Makoto with a puzzled face. It's not to question the statement of a certain Chuanibiao cartoonist, but it's a little incredible. If it's Mr. Nazuma AG, you don't need to test it, Chang. After all, the comics that Mr. Nazuma AG is serializing now, whether it's the plot or the character setting, are basically provided by you, Chang. So, Chang, you want to test the weekly? No, to be precise, should it be the attitude of the weekly? A certain Chuanibiao cartoonist fell into a state of stunned. Because I know you want to retire, I deliberately lowered the performance of the comics, intending to leave a stain on your farewell ceremony, and then take the opportunity to stimulate you. When Yoshida was halfway through his words, he saw a certain Chuyunibaku manga artist looking him up and down with a mysterious look, and he was stunned. Chang, why are you looking at me with that look? My beloved cat, I didn't expect you would have such a magical brain hole and such magical logic. Takahashi Makoto patted Yoshida's shoulder and invited his editor-in-chief. My beloved cat, you should quit your job as editor-in-chief and concentrate on learning to draw comics with me. Although the words of the Chuyunibaku manga artist were full of praise, Yoshida could still hear, the other party was mocking him. Okay. The idea of Chuyunibu is really not something that a mere mortal like me can interpret. Yoshida, who had such a feeling in his heart, smiled bitterly with some embarrassment and helplessness. Then, Chen, what exactly are you going to test? If I explain it in detail, let's not talk about the profoundness of the topic, it's a question whether you can understand it, my cat. After mocking Yoshida again, Takahashi Cheng thought for a moment before slowly speaking. Well, in words that you can understand, my cat, the reason why I serialize daily plots for a long time without considering the performance of the comics is actually to test it. Am I, the legendary protagonist? Dear readers, have you heard of the 716 plus dream work model? 716 plus dream means working 16 hours a day for 7 days, and thinking about how to work tomorrow in your dreams at night. I used to think that the 5-2, day and night work model was very cruel, but compared to 716 plus dream, it is simply weak. A cat said that 716 can be done. After all, it has been like this in recent days, but plus dream is really impossible. Even self-hypnosis can't do it. A middle school cartoonist. Author, MaleProtagonist Mao. Chapter 700. Chapter 700, Testing Method. Protagonist, the main character. Refers to the protagonist in a work. There is usually only one protagonist in a work. For a work, the protagonist is an important embodiment of the theme and idea, and is always in the main position of conflicts, so the protagonist often has the most roles. HN, what you are talking about can be found on Du Niang. As the editor-in-chief of a weekly, I already know this common sense knowledge. Yoshida waved his hand and interrupted. He asked a middle school cartoonist who was spreading common knowledge about the protagonist to him, so, what do you want to say? My beloved cat, without any foreshadowing, are you sure you can understand what I'm going to say based on your IQ? A certain middle-class cartoonist was rude about Yoshida's impolite behavior. The land uses a sarcastic tone to fight back. Be a little more self-aware, my beloved is a cat. The person who has no self-awareness, who is he? Searched Can on Google. Yoshida, who didn't want to be ridiculed and complained about again, could only dare to roar like this in his heart, right? Okay, based on the fact that you, my cat, have a certain understanding of the protagonist position, then the next step is to analyze the protagonist aura. A certain middle school cartoonist wearing a white coat said. He said this seriously. By the way, Makoto Takahashi looked like a scientific researcher at this moment. The so-called protagonist halo is usually a byproduct of the protagonist's law. It usually appears when describing unreasonable phenomena caused by the protagonist's law. Oh, by the way, my beloved cat, you can understand what the protagonist's law is. Of course I know. Hey, Chen, don't underestimate me as the editor-in-chief. Regarding the dilly-dallying attitude of a middle-class cartoonist, a certain editor-in-chief visually estimated that he was about to go berserk. Chen, what exactly do you want to say? To put it simply, I just want to test it out through this period of serialization. A certain second-grade cartoonist looked up at the ceiling, paused for a moment, and then whispered, my existence, is he the protagonist in a certain work? This statement. After Yoshida was silent for a moment, he covered his forehead and sighed helplessly. Because Takahashi Makoto's Chuyunibu, visual inspection is even more serious. My beloved is a cat. I would say that it is impossible for an ordinary person like you to understand. Regarding Yoshida's reaction, Takahashi Makoto shook his head repeatedly and sighed helplessly. Sure enough, your reaction is what I expected. Exactly the same. No, I'm just feeling sorry for you, Chen, your ideas are really unique. Yoshida, you actually want to complain about a certain middle-class cartoonist who has a strong middle-class atmosphere, right? Actually, I started to doubt it a long time ago. Takahashi Makoto gently touched the blindfold on his face and stood by the window, with his back to Yoshida and said, "My dependent cat, do you think that for normal people? For example, what is the probability of encountering a bank robbery incident when passing by a bank? Or, for example, when encountering a bank robbery incident, the probability of being able to rescue the hostages from the robbers and complete the counterattack, how big is it? Indeed, for ordinary people, that kind of thing is indeed difficult to encounter and difficult to do. Okay. I admit that what you said, Chen, makes some sense, but you didn't pay the price, right?" Yoshida looked at a certain second-grade cartoonist's movements and tone involuntarily slowed down a lot, "But, according to what Aiken you just said, protagonist halo is a byproduct of the protagonist's law. Assuming that Aiken you are really the protagonist of a certain work, if you are the protagonist, then why are you still injured, Chen? As the protagonist at this time, shouldn't you explode the small universe, kill the enemy without any harm? My familiar cat, are you sure you have actually seen that work? The protagonist was beaten to the point of death by the enemy before he exploded into a small universe and killed the enemy." Makoto Takahashi turned around and took out the book from the desk. The standalone copy of Zanchi Hitomi no Red shook it towards Yoshida, "And the protagonist may not be able to survive until the end. What if the guy who made me the protagonist, like Ryuko, likes to be at the end? What about killing the hero?" "Well, Chen, I think it's best for us not to continue discussing this topic." Yoshida, who suddenly felt a little chilly for some reason, suddenly started to persuade him, "If it's really like what you imagined, Chen, I always feel that in the near future, Chen, you will die a violent death. My beloved cat, you are really cowardly." "Maybe, no, I am sure that those words I just said were deliberately arranged by that person." For Yoshida, who started to tremble, the second-level cartoonist did not taunt the other person as he did at the end of the scene, but instead comforted the other person in a rare move. "And if my prediction is not wrong, now I can be said to be in an invincible state." The state of invincibility. Looking at the position of a certain middle-level cartoonist, Yoshida couldn't help but twitch the corners of his mouth. Hey, Chen, don't you want to look out of the window in order to confirm that kind of illusory statement? Jump out there. Of course not. He glared at Yoshida like he was an idiot. A certain middle school manga artist came to the desk, tapped the manga manuscript on the desk with his fingers, and explained, "Speaking of which, I am a cat. The invincible state I am talking about refers to the comic Steins Gate." Although he didn't fully say what he wanted to say, Yoshida's incomprehensible expression, a middle-class cartoonist understood it instantly. "Do you still remember the manga DN serialized by the mangaka Shoinkuma when he debuted?" A middle-class mangaka who overestimated Yoshida's understanding ability helplessly spread his hands and tried to use an example that a certain editor in charge was familiar with. "Let's analyze it. My beloved cat, my current state is as if I have already written the time of death in that little notebook. In order for me to die at that set time in the future, everything in the middle will be fatal to ordinary people. For me, events, at best, can only lead to death at that point in the future." Is this the thinking mode of a severe Form 2 patient? An editor who could no longer keep up with the opponent's switching of thoughts said that he had resigned himself to the disadvantage. "With your IQ, my familiar cat, you may have a little more information, so I will be more straightforward." In response to the complaints of a certain second-grade cartoonist, Takahashi Makoto naturally chose to ignore it and mind his own business. He continued, "If I am not wrong, before the serialization of the manga Steins Gate is completed, even if I continue to serialize only ordinary daily plots as I have done recently, this manga will definitely not be cut in half." Oh. If Chen, your comics were cut in half, that proves that I am not the protagonist in a certain work, let alone a plaything puppet created by a certain existence. Makoto Takahashi stared at Yoshida with squinted eyes, a joyful smile on his face, My companion is a cat, do you understand now? This is my test. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. A middle school cartoonist. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 701. It has been a month since I talked with a certain Chuyuni cartoonist. In the past month, the performance of the manga Steins Gate has fluctuated slightly, but it is still hovering around 10th place. It has not fallen to the stage of being cut off, and of course it has not made a comeback and sprinted to the top 5. Taiwan Novel Network Rightward Arrow. If Yoshida had not talked with a certain Chuyuni cartoonist before, he might have been surprised by this result, but since talking with a certain Chuyuni cartoonist that day, Yoshida is not happy at all at this moment. Nonsense. This was Yoshida's complaint and rebuke to a certain Chuyuni cartoonist who refused to repent at that time. However, now, for the performance of the manga Steins Gate, which has little fluctuation but stable position, Yoshida is somewhat skeptical, and also somewhat convinced. I believe the speculation made by a certain Chuyunabeka manga artist. The speculation without any evidence that the world I live in is just a work created by others. There is no plot twist at all. The development of the story is still a dull and slightly sci-fi daily life. The highlight of the character is only in the attributes of the personality, which may resonate with readers in a short period of time, but lacks the recognition of readers. This is the current situation of the manga Steins Gate. However, such a manga has not been cut off due to the decline in popularity, nor has it exploded with any exciting plot to make the performance of the manga soar and the ranking reverse. I swear, as an editor for many years, Yoshida has never seen the performance of any manga like the Steins Gate serialized in the current weekly. It is precisely because of this that Yoshida began to believe the speculation of a certain Chuyunabeka manga artist. After all, according to what a certain Chuyunabeka manga artist said before, the current situation is likely caused by the protagonist halo. Humans are strange creatures. Once they start to believe in something, they will have a panic and anxiety mentality. Yoshida is the same. When the editor-in-chief of a weekly magazine began to believe in the speculation of a certain Chuyunabeka cartoonist, he naturally became afraid, and uneasy. And more importantly, the panic and anxiety of the editor-in-chief are not only due to the speculation of a certain Chuyunabeka cartoonist, but also because of the words and deeds of the male protagonist Kuma in the comics. Time travel. This is the theme throughout the comic Steins Gate, and it is also what the male protagonist Kuma and his friends have been studying in the recently serialized comics. Regarding the delusion of persecution declarations issued from time to time by the male protagonist Kuma in the comic Steins Gate, at the beginning, Yoshida, like the readers, thought that this was just a manifestation of Chuyunabu, or a secondary symptom. However, according to the conversation with a certain Chuyuni cartoonist that day, and combined with the recent strange performance of this comic, Yoshida felt an inexplicable sense of uneasiness in his heart after rereading the serial content from the first episode. Especially in the recent serialization, the male protagonist and the tsundere assistant explored the mystery of the time machine together, and invented the time jump machine using the principle of the telephone microwave oven. In order to fulfill the wishes of his partners, Yoshida used the time machine several times, and his uneasy premonition became stronger. The male protagonist Kuma's unscrupulous experiment, or, the unscrupulous temptation of the cartoonist Kuma. Will it lead to irreversible results? After ordinary people get power, most of them will have an unbalanced mentality, thinking that they have become the only one in the world or a special existence in the plane, but in fact, they are controlled by a fake thing called power, and their existence as people is swallowed up. Isn't this what the male protagonist Kuma said and did in the comics? Isn't this also the case with the manga artist Kuma's real-life attempts? Without waiting for the comics to be serialized, Yoshida, the weekly editor-in-chief, has already speculated that the male protagonist in the comics Winkuma will definitely cause irreparable consequences and even harm the people around him because of the previous behavior of letting his friends abuse the time machine. Then what about the real-life middle school manga artist Winkuma? Will he also cause an uncontrollable disaster because of his unscrupulous attempts? Thinking of this, Yoshida's uneasy premonition became stronger and stronger. No. I must have a serious talk with that guy Aiken. No, just talking is not enough. What we should do now, is to stop that guy Aiken from committing suicide. Hey, Yoshida-san, is the manga Steins Gate serialized by Winkuma really the same as what Nazuma-kun said? Is the current content just accumulating strength for the ultimate move, just when Yoshida made up his mind to stop Takahashi Makoto? Yujiro, a colleague who is the editor-in-chief of the weekly magazine, walked up to Yoshida with a new issue of the weekly magazine and said, "But judging from the current serialized content, it feels like they are using various daily plots to delay time." "Yujiro, I don't have time to argue with you now," Yoshida said angrily, then ignored Yujiro and started to pack things quickly. "Ah! Yoshida-san, didn't you just come back from the Phoenix Academy's teacher Kumayama? Now you are planning to go out?" Yujiro did not flinch because of Yoshida's unkind tone, but instead teased with a smile, "Isn't it possible? Did Hiromaru-sensei escape again?" "Why did I say again?" "Shut up," Yoshida, who had already packed the necessary items, gave Yujiro a cold look and took a deep breath. "Yujiro, I don't have much time to explain to you now, bring it here." What?" Yujiro, who saw Yoshida looking so serious for the first time, was stunned for a moment, and then asked with some confusion, "Yoshida-san, is something urgent happening? Do you need my help? Give me the keys to the motorcycle. Now. Now. Here, Yujiro just took out the key from his pocket, and Yoshida snatched it away. Seeing the anxious look on Yoshida's face as he hurriedly left, Yujiro hesitated for a moment, and immediately walked quickly. He chased after him. Hey, Yoshida-san, what happened? Where are you going in such a hurry?" "I'm going to Cheng's place now." As the elevator descended, Yoshida said angrily while putting on his safety helmet, "To stop the crazy behavior of that Shuyunibu cartoonist." Is it the crazy behavior of Mr. Kumaru from the Phoenix Institute?" Yujiro recalled the dark history of a certain second-year manga artist who had done all kinds of weird things in the past. He couldn't help but show sympathy on his face, and patted Yoshida as if to comfort him. On his shoulder, "Well, Yoshida-san, as expected, Mr. Kushima from the Phoenix Academy did something weird again this time, right? It's more than just weird." Yoshida paused for a moment, then gritted his teeth and said angrily, "That guy Aiken is simply seeking death." "Seek death?" Yujiro was a little confused about Yoshida's analysis. Of course, it's not that he doubts the meaning of the word, but that Yujiro thinks, the manga artist Winkuma, has he ever done anything that is not considered seeking death since he became a manga artist? No, it's not just about seeking death. After Yoshida got on the motorcycle with a handsome posture, he shouted angrily amidst the roar of the accelerator, "If Cheng's guess is correct, that guy is now everything you do is destroying the entire world." Destroying the world or something, is too exaggerated, right? Looking at Yoshida who was leaving the dust, Yujiro couldn't help scratching his head and sighed helplessly. "Speaking of what I just said, Yoshida, sure enough, Sang is in the advanced stage of Shuyunibu, just like Mr. Jujhen from Phoenix Academy. A middle school cartoonist. Author, Mao Do Sde Mao. Chapter 702. Ha 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 ha. Facing Yoshida, who looked anxious and was in a breathless state, the only one who could laugh so joyfully at this time would be a certain middle-grade manga artist. "My beloved cat, I looked at your look like I don't have time to explain, get in the car now, I thought you had some serious situation and you wanted to risk your life to remonstrate. It turns out it's just a trivial matter like this. Little thing. What should I say about Yashida's mood at this moment? Maybe it seems very entangled and depressed. Searched can on Google. I rode my bike here despite the scorching sun, just to stop the unscrupulous death-seeking behavior of a certain middle-grade cartoonist. However, my hard work, my worries, and my sense of uneasiness during this period of time, what I got in exchange was the perfunctory and indifferent attitude of a middle-class cartoonist. Such a strong contrast really made Yoshida suddenly feel a little tired. But Aiken, I'm really worried. Looking at a certain middle-level cartoonist who looked unconcerned, Yoshida sighed helplessly, since I heard your speculation that day, and in recent times, between the plot of the manga Steins Gate and the success of the manga in the weekly magazine, everything seems to have been arranged by fate. Huh? My beloved cat, you are really seriously ill. Facing a certain editor who looked worried and entangled, Takahashi Makoto decisively complained, everything I said that day, was actually just talking casually. But after Yoshida was stunned, a look of madness appeared on his face. Now Makoto Takahashi, you guy actually told me that those previous shocking speculations were actually lies. Oh? My belonging cat, look at your expression. In response to Yoshida's somewhat extreme reaction, a certain middle-level cartoonist was stunned for a moment, and then asked with surprise on his face, could it be that, my beloved cat, you really believe it? Yoshida naturally believed it. Because who the hell would know that when Makoto Takahashi was making speculations before, he would actually show that serious expression and that unusually serious tone. In that case, even if it is unbelievable or difficult to accept, but at least it will cause doubt. So, Yoshida's choice of silence at this time is indeed the best way to deal with it. My beloved cat, you are surprisingly innocent. Seeing Yoshida's awkward look, a certain middle-level cartoonist felt very pleasure. I didn't expect you to be such a person. By the way, my beloved cat, how have you managed to survive these years when you are so easily deceived? Faced with a middle school cartoonist who wanted to ridicule and make fun of himself in order to gain pleasure, even though Yoshida wanted to resist in his heart, but the editor-in-chief of a certain weekly magazine actually knew that at this time, he was unable to confront him head-on. It belongs to a middle-class cartoonist. Originally, Yoshida wanted to distract himself from being abused by looking around at the surrounding environment, but at this moment, when Yoshida's eyes subconsciously glanced at the comic manuscripts on the table, he suddenly thought of a way to resist. Hey, Aiken, let's not mention the things you deceived me before. Yoshida reached out and picked up the comic manuscript on the table, with a disgusting smile like a winner's condescending smile on his face. It's because of this incident, made me guess the next plot development of the comic Steins Gate. Huh? My beloved cat, you actually guessed it now. Looking at Yoshida's complacent look, a certain Chuyuni manga was not surprised. No, to be precise, he should be showing off with some disdain. He waved his hand and said, in a sense, my companion cat, you are really slow. That means there is someone better than me. The proud smile on Yoshida's face suddenly stopped, and he stared at a certain middle-level cartoonist with some surprise. After thinking for a moment, he asked in a doubtful tone, is it Mr. Eiji Niizuma? Of course. After all, the strength of the King of Black Flame is enough to fight against an existence of the level of cheater. Although he agreed with Eiji Niizuma's strength, the development of the plot was not able to completely hide it from the opponent, so he still let a certain second-grade cartoonist felt a little depressed, but the depression went away quickly. A certain second-grade cartoonist seemed to have thought of something pleasant. His expression was full of depression just now, but in an instant he smiled like a little fox. Replaced. But that guy, the King of Black Flame, definitely didn't expect that before. He just speculated on the turning point of the plot. Oh my, I really look forward to that guy's expression after the plots are serialized in the future. The plot of a divine twist, and the subsequent plot. Based on your IQ, you can guess that the manga Steins Gate will have a dramatic plot twist next, which is already amazing. So, as for the follow-up plot, Yoshida, you'd better give up. Don't ask, and don't try to get something out of me. Seeing Yoshida hesitantly preparing to speak, a certain middle-level cartoonist immediately interrupted him. My beloved cat, I remember telling you before. Let's talk about spoilers. If you are really forgetful to this extent, you can go back and find Madoka and read it. Okay, Yoshida curled his lips and suddenly remembered another thing he cared about. By the way, Chen, have you contacted Mr. Eiji Nizuma again? My beloved cat, your way of expression is a bit strange. A certain Chuyuni cartoonist waved his brush like a dagger and asked back in a strange way, why can't I contact the King of Black Flame? No, I mean. Yoshida took a few steps back because he was worried that he would be accidentally injured by a certain Chuyuni cartoonist. Did you communicate with each other about the serialized comic plots again? Communicate with each other? No, I just relayed our previous conversation about some speculations to the King of Black Flame. A certain Chuyunibaku manga artist paused for a moment, then looked at his editor-in-chief with contempt, but the Black Flame King, just after hearing the nonsense about I am the protagonist, immediately guessed the magical plot twist that will appear in the manga Steins Gate. So my cat, you are really useless. Yes, after all, compared to you evil geniuses, I am just an ordinary person. After self-consoling self-deprecation, Yoshida asked the Chuyunibaku manga artist the question he had always wanted to ask. Speaking of which, Makoto, although Mr. Eiji Shinzuma is now serializing alone, you should actually be involved in that comic, right? Only the character design and plot outline. There is also a plot outline. Yoshida looked at a certain Chuyunibaku manga artist with some surprise. In this case, the manga serialized by Mr. Eiji Shinzuma. Is there any difference between what you are doing and serializing it under the name Makoto Shinkai before? So, I just gave a plot outline. A certain Chuyunibaku manga artist spread his hands and asked his editor-in-chief, and, who stipulated that a comic can only have one ending? It's not the only. In that case, the comic serialized by Mr. Nizuma Eiji now. Yoshida seemed to understand, but after hesitating for a moment, he couldn't help but ask, is it according to the plot outline you provided before, Chen? The Black Flame King is not serialized according to the outline I provided. A certain middle school cartoonist who inexplicably began to look out the window suddenly sighed, and then sighed, the Black Flame King. I still can't give up the shackles of the identity of human. Because I am new, because I am a subordinate, I should take the blame, be ordered around, and have my credit taken away. Tisk tisk tisk, the world is really filthy. So, if I want to avoid being eroded by the filth of the human world, a certain cat thinks that I should learn from Lord Dio and issue a domineering declaration of JoJo, I am not a human anymore. I wish all readers can temporarily avoid being eroded by the filthy world in their dreams. Good night, that's all.